White plays pawn to e4. Black plays pawn to c5. White plays knight to f3. Black plays pawn to e6. White plays pawn to b3. Black plays pawn to a6. White plays bishop to b2. Black plays knight to c6. White plays pawn to g3. Black plays pawn to d6. White plays bishop to g2. Black plays knight to f6. White plays pawn to e5. Black plays pawn to e5. White plays knight to e5. Black plays knight to e5. White plays bishop to e5. Black plays bishop to d6. White plays bishop to b2. Black plays king to g8. White plays knight to a3. Black plays pawn to e5. White plays knight to c4. Black plays bishop to g4. White plays pawn to f3. Black plays bishop to f5. White plays pawn to d3. Black plays bishop to c7. White plays king to g1. Black plays rook to e8. White plays queen to d2. Black plays pawn to b5. White plays knight to e3. Black plays bishop to e6. White plays king to h1. Black plays queen to d7. White plays rook to e1. Black plays rook to d8. White plays queen to f2. Black plays pawn to h5. White plays pawn to f4. Black plays pawn to f4. White plays pawn to f4. Black plays knight to g4. White plays knight to g4. Black plays bishop to g4. White plays rook to e8. Black plays rook to e8. White plays queen to c5. Black plays rook to e2. White plays queen to g5. Black plays pawn to f6. White plays bishop to f6. Black plays rook to g2. White plays king to g2. Black plays queen to c6. White plays king to g3. Black plays queen to f6. White plays queen to f6. Black plays pawn to f6. White plays rook to e1. Black plays king to f7. White plays pawn to c4. Black plays bishop to b6. White plays pawn to b4. Black plays bishop to d4. White plays rook to c1. Black plays bishop to f5. White plays pawn to c5. Black plays king to e7. White plays king to h4. Black plays bishop to g4. White plays king to g3. Black plays king to d7. White plays rook to c2. Black plays king to c6. White plays pawn to h3. Black plays bishop to f5. White plays king to h4. Black plays bishop to e3. White plays king to h5. Black plays bishop to h3. White plays king to g6. Black plays bishop to f1. White plays pawn to f5. Black plays bishop to d4. White plays rook to c1. Black plays bishop to g2. White plays rook to e1. Black plays bishop to d5. White plays pawn to a3. Black plays bishop to b2. White plays rook to e2. Black plays bishop to a3. White plays king to f6. Black plays bishop to b4. White plays pawn to d4. Black plays bishop to c3. White plays king to e5. Black plays pawn to b4. White plays rook to h2. Black plays bishop to c4. White plays rook to h6. Black plays king to b5. White plays rook to b6. Black plays king to a5. White plays rook to b8. Black plays pawn to b3. White plays pawn to c6. Black plays pawn to b2. White plays pawn to c7. Black plays bishop to b4. White plays pawn to c8. Black plays pawn to b1. White plays queen to c7. Black plays king to 4. White plays queen to c4. Black plays pawn to a5. White plays pawn to f6. Black plays queen to e1. White plays king to f5. Black plays queen to f2. White plays king to e6. Black plays queen to e3. White plays king to f7. Black plays queen to h3. White plays queen to c6. Black plays king to b3. White plays queen to e6.